The couple of things I wanted to note here were that, as you've seen in some of these videos, what are these blue, ridiculously glowing blue rivers? These are the Foamies product, craft foam, from a craft store like Michael's or Hobby Lobby or something like that. That's what this is, and they've just cut them to look like that. They're fit to length of a 2.5-inch hexagon from flat to flat, and in various lengths, and the width has been cut to fit within the flat side of a hex. Now, before I go any further, I should also say that this is a configuration that goes from the flats to the flats and doesn't stop. It does not go from flat to corner and then carry on the corner format, shape, design. In many board games, you will have layouts that either go from the well, I'll move the little buildings out of the way, but you either go from the flat to the flat. As I was saying, you either have a configuration for the rivers that goes from either the flat to the flat or the corner to the corner. So in other words, the river would be placed like this and not like this. And you can have a combination. So you can have a going from flat to flat that then turns and proceeds corner to corner for any duration of the river. But that kind of a thing is an important distinction to note, because that also applies to roads. You can have a road that goes from flat to flat and so on, or that goes from flat to turning to a corner. And of course, that's just an example. It could start from corner to corner. Your road could go like this from corner to corner, like this. So your road could go like this. And of course, when you make a curve or any kind of variation, you can always go from flat to flat to corner, and so on and so forth. That makes it more difficult. So what I would recommend is you make a choice. Either you have a game table layout, especially when hexagons are used, that you go from flat to flat only, or corner to corner only. Or you must accept the fact that if you're going to have a combination, you're going to need a little, like, I guess you would call it an adapter. So you would go from flat to then turning to go to corner, and then back to flat, and so on, for the length of the shape. So that's what these rivers and so on are. That's what all this is about. And one of the reasons we use this really bright blue is because we can't find a blue that's suitable. This bright blue shows up really good on camera, and in broadcasting that really is helpful, which is why you see such a high contrast here, this olive colored instead of green, because let's face it, most battlefields don't have a golf course green color. They're like muddy, terrible, awful, tundra. So that's why we chose this instead of a green. You'll see that this right here is a representation of a marshland, using that fabric that we talked about in another episode with little bushes on it to look like a marshland. And of course, the buildings and the dock scene that we've got started going here is an example to show you what we're trying to do. So we've got some 3D printed buildings that are coming up really well. And the idea here is to have it look like a village and a port. Well, of course, it's just thrown on here. There's no rhyme or reason to this orientation and the way this is done. But that's what we're looking at here. Various experiments in the size of the, we'll call them Viking ships. Again, the size of the river here, creek, has nothing to do with the size of these boats. These are completely different productions. These boats would be meant for probably, obviously, a much larger body of water, or these creeks would only permit very small transports, even smaller than this one here. So, but at any rate, this again, the water is a representation, the boats are a representation, but in this case, in order to see the figures and not go to a 100th scale, we have a situation where we need to decide how big we want these boats to be. These are 172 scale. Here's an example of a guy who is one of the oarsmen, and in this particular case, we have not yet got to the point where we put the benches in so the guy can sit on the bench. We are experimenting with the scale here, whether we should show a 172 figure on a 15mm scale boat, only because it's cheaper to build a boat this small than an actual 172 scale, because it would be ginormous, and the figures would be more visible. So that's the other thing that we're doing. We have a bunch of these Viking or Roman sailors, and the decision is, we're trying to get to the decision as to the best kind of boat. Now, it's true, the boats all came in, as you know, various different sizes. Some were sleeker, some were wider, and some were faster. So you have your normal, almost, normal looking boat, you have your slim boat, and then you have your wide transport, larger boat. So these are the kinds of things that we have to consider when we go into 3D printing any kind of these boats. We have to decide, because we have to obviously put a mast on, a cross beam, and then a sail. So a lot of that has bearing to the decision process. The difficulty is the mast and the cross beam and the sail. So those are the considerations that are going to be the next things that we're going to be doing. I also wanted to show you that we're working on these little bridges, and these bridges are interesting because you'll notice there's a notch. There's a notch right here because the river material is going to sit on the river. You can see sitting on the river, and the reason the notch is there is so that, because of the material can sit, the bridge is actually straddling the material properly and not just sitting on the foam. It's actually straddling the foam, because of the notch allows it to do that. And the reason that that's necessary is so that it looks more appropriate than an object just sitting on the foam without concern for how it comes off on both ends. It's going to come up and then across and then come down and touch the actual surface of the game table. That's why that notch exists, so you can do that, and it's not just simply sitting on the Foamies. And then, of course, this isn't done yet. This has to be coated and painted like the other one. This one here is coated and painted and kind of a done deal. So I've realized it looks wet because these are all brand new, and we're hoping that as the eons go by, that all this coating makes these figures last forever. And generations from now, hopefully, this game, all of this hobby will exist, and these figures, although certainly technology will change, we're hoping that these figures in our collection and other collections for posterity exist for many years to come. And that's why coating these things in whatever material you want to coat with, this happens to be the clear coating called polyacrylic from hardware store. And of course there's all different kinds of coatings, but we found that the polyacrylic seems to be the most, even though it does provide for a little of a wet look, that we expect to wear off in the coming years. That will be diminished, or we can add another spray coating to reduce that wet look, to the glossy wet look that is the result of plastic coating. And/or we could also just paint it. But the plastic coating is necessary for the longevity of the piece, and to prevent paint from rubbing off over use over time. And so there it is. Various kinds of coatings we could experiment. This is a dip. This is, or painted on. This is not a spray. But a spray coating of polyacrylic is definitely available. We just try and avoid the sprays whenever we can because of the fumes, and especially being in the north here in Illinois, the fumes in the cold season, you don't want to have them permeate the house, unless, of course, you're living by yourself and you don't care. But then that's not probably going to be good for very long. Anyway, you don't want to have that that fume hanging around. You either do it out in the garage or wait for better weather or something of that nature. But in our case, waiting is not an option. We want to get the stuff done. And spraying in the house here in the basement is not a good idea. So we're painting on the polyacrylic.